Picture a wheat field at dawn somewhere in the arid interior of Western Australia, the horizon shimmering with heat. And out of that warped distance emerges not an invading column of men, but a rolling tide of some 20,000 flightless birds, each standing near 6 feet tall, advancing with a strange and unbothered purpose toward the crops of settlers who had already survived one war. It is a scene that reads as almost dystopian, a confrontation between the machinery of a modern state and the indifferent hunger of nature. And yet it is entirely historical. In the closing months of 1932, the Commonwealth of Australia deployed soldiers, machine guns, and thousands of rounds of ammunition against a population of emus, and lost. The observed accounts of this episode, absurd as they appear, shed light on something far larger than agricultural nuisance, bringing to the forefront a key theme of institutional hubris colliding with a world that refuses to be governed by force. An aspect I found particularly striking is how sincerely the whole affair was conducted, as though the outcome were ever in doubt. The origins of the conflict lie in the post-war settlement schemes that shaped so much of rural Australia in the preceding decade. Following the First World War, thousands of returned soldiers were granted marginal parcels of land in the wheat belt districts around Campion and Walgoolan, encouraged to break the ground and cultivate wheat in country that was, in truth, poorly suited to it. This arrangement, admirable in sentiment, proved bitter in practice, as the Great Depression collapsed wheat prices and the promised government subsidies failed to materialize. The settlers, already enamored by drought, debt, and isolation, found themselves in a genuinely dire position by the harvest of 1932. It was precisely at this moment, during the emu's inland breeding migration, that roughly 20,000 of the birds descended upon the newly cleared farmland, drawn by the water and the cultivated crops. In tandem with their appetite for wheat, the emus trampled fences as they moved, and through these breaches came the rabbits, compounding the destruction. As such, a population of men who had come to farm in peace found themselves besieged by a creature that no plowshare could repel. The response of the settlers highlights the peculiar logic of men shaped by military experience. Many of them were ex-servicemen, and rather than approaching an agricultural authority, they sent a deputation directly to the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pearce, requesting the assistance of the Army, and in particular, the deployment of machine guns. The request, extraordinary as it sounds, was granted, in part because Pearce saw an opportunity for the soldiers to gain target practice while assisting the beleaguered farmers, and in part because the birds were framed as a genuine economic threat. The result is one of the more improbable military commissions in the history of the Commonwealth. Command fell to Major G.P.W. Meredith of the 7th Heavy Battery of the Royal Australian Artillery, who was dispatched with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and some 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The operation was even briefly delayed to allow a cinematographer the possibility of capturing footage, a detail which reveals how confidently a swift and decisive victory was anticipated. In short, the state marched into the wheat belt expecting a slaughter, and instead met an education. The first engagements brought this misplaced confidence to light almost immediately. On the 2nd of November, 1932, the gunners encountered a group of roughly 50 emus near Campion, and the birds, rather than clustering obligingly within range, scattered into small, mobile formations that proved maddeningly difficult to target. This behavior, observed repeatedly throughout the campaign, amounted to a kind of instinctive guerrilla dispersal, in which the flock fragmented the moment fire was opened, and the guns fell silent against empty scrub. A subsequent attempt to ambush a larger congregation of perhaps 1,000 birds at a local dam appeared, for a moment, more promising, until the Lewis gun jammed after felling only a dozen of them, and the remainder vanished into the heat. As provided by Major Meredith's own dispatches, the emus displayed a striking resilience to gunfire, absorbing rounds and continuing to run at speeds approaching 30 miles an hour. Additionally, an effort to mount a gun upon a moving truck and pursue the birds across the terrain collapsed into farce as the ground proved too rough for any accuracy and the emus simply outpaced the vehicle. This pattern of futility, repeated across the opening week, brought to the forefront the yawning gap between the intentions of the operation and the reality of the field. Major Meredith's later reflections on his adversary have become the enduring legacy of the affair, and they reward close attention. As Meredith himself once remarked, the emus could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks, and he observed that they were led by what appeared to be cunning sentinel birds, standing watch while their fellows fed and raising the alarm at the first approach. In a comment that has been quoted ever since, he suggested that if a military division possessed the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would be capable of facing any army in the world, likening their endurance to that of Zulu warriors. This framing, delivered by a professional artillery officer, sheds light on the sheer psychological reversal at the heart of the campaign, in which the hunters came to speak of the hunted with something resembling grudging respect. By the accounting that closed the first phase of operations, the withdrawal came after only a few dozen confirmed kills against thousands of rounds expended, and the matter was raised in Parliament to considerable ridicule. As such, what had been imagined as target practice had become, in the observed record, a public embarrassment for the Ministry of Defense. The campaign did not end there, for the settlers, undeterred, renewed their appeal, and Meredith was returned to the field in the middle of November to resume the effort. Over the following weeks, the tally improved through persistence rather than through any newfound tactical brilliance, and by the beginning of December, the Major reported some 986 emus killed against 9,860 rounds of ammunition, amounting to almost exactly 10 rounds for every confirmed bird. Even by the most generous estimates, which allow for the many wounded that later perished, the operation dispatched only a fraction of the 20,000 that had descended upon the district. The birds, for their part, simply endured, dispersing when pressed and returning when the guns departed. What ultimately protected the wheat belt in the years that followed was not the army at all, but the humbler apparatus of bounty payments and, above all, the construction of exclusion fencing, the long barrier fences that physically denied the emus entry. In short, the problem was solved by a wall rather than a weapon, a fact that quietly indicts the entire premise of the military solution. Overall, the Emu War of 1932 endures not merely as a curiosity, but as a compact and almost allegorical lesson in the limits of institutional force. There is something admirably stark in the image of a modern army, fresh from the mechanized horrors of the Western Front, being outmaneuvered by a flightless bird that wanted nothing more than water and grain. And the whole affair sheds light on the peculiar vanity of official narratives, which so rarely record their own defeats with honesty. One can only imagine the mood in that dusty encampment as the gunners tallied their rounds against so meager a return. And so a question remains for us, watching from a century of distance and considerably greater confidence in our own machinery. When the modern state today declares war upon inflation, upon addiction, upon nature itself, and marches out with its instruments of force, how often does it too find itself firing 10,000 rounds into an empty horizon, only to be quietly defeated by something that never agreed to fight in the first place?